So I'm going to just give you a brief overview of points of emphasis that I have for objective and subjective test measures. We're going to cover some of this on the weekend, but I just want to make it clear that some things are very high priorities on my list. And if you look at this PowerPoint, right, you can watch it in presentation mode or you can go through it just by scrolling through. You'll miss a few animations like this nifty little one, right? Woo! Objective test items are made up of these different formats. I want you to pay special attention, not just to the examples, but really the ideas of when to use a particular type of assessment and when not to use. The things that you care about in general are the time it's going to take and the quality of the information that you're going to get. Now, when I talk about time, I'm talking about time to make, time for the students to take, and time for you to grade. And while being all project-based and assigning a lot of essays and everything always sounds like a good idea, if you have 100, 120 students that you are trying to give feedback to, essays become a really bad idea really fast, and you go nuts just grading. You don't have time for anything else. So the question becomes, how do I balance the quality? Because if I swap out my essays, which are going to give me a really good idea of what my students can and can't do and what they really know and how they understand it, with a bunch of multiple choice recognition type items, I'm going to suffer a lot in terms of quality. And so it's always going to be a balancing act between the two. And my recommendation is going to be, use the essays in the performance assessments, and essays are just a written performance assessment on the high priority stuff, the high level goals. Lower level goals go with the objective type test items, true and false, multiple choice, matching, short answer, and so on. So if we're talking about true and false, what's good about them? Looking at this list, they're really easy. You look at something, you make a judgment, true or false. They're easy for you to make, pretty easy. If you want to make them good, you have to take a little more time. But once you get the knack, it comes pretty quickly. Because they're so quick, you can cover a lot of basic facts. They're also good at distinguishing between fact and opinion if we're talking about a broader type of true-false, and applying really the alternative response idea to them. We'll talk more about that on Saturday. The problems with true and false, usually they're kind of hard to go beyond just the basic knowledge or recall level 1 type stuff. There's this huge impact of guessing on test scores, right? See how it gets bigger? Another brilliant animation. If something is false, there's no guarantee that the person knows what the right answer is. And if you introduce this idea of correcting true-false, well, then you're kind of losing the benefit of the true-false, right? Which is that it's quick, because now you're having the student write. Now you're going to have to make judgments about whether that's a good answer or not. And it's really turning into either a short answer or a restricted essay type question, depending on what you're asking for. And it's hard sometimes to really get a good balance of true and false as a last con, because you don't want to kind of get your students to be able to figure out, well, if I don't know what it is, they usually have a lot more true questions than false questions, so I'll just guess true. And then the guessing factor is not just 50%, it goes up maybe to 60, 70%, and so on. So think about these carefully when you're considering using true and false. And they can be used in some situations, but those situations need to involve a large number of kind of fact-based stuff. If we extend it to alternative response, the options become a little more flexible. And in this sense, when we look at in science stuff, what kingdom, when I was in school there were only 3, now there's a lot more, what type of government, what learning principles, whatever. The idea is that it's like a multiple choice, only the options never change. I'm going to give you a whole bunch of things and you tell me what kingdom it belongs to. Like in the in-class science materials, you tell me what type of symbiosis it is. If we're talking about whether something is a validity, reliability, or bias measure, you tell me which of those 3 it is. But the options would never change across the different questions. If you look at these, recommendations I think are pretty clear. If you have any questions, let me know. If we switch to matching items, you can do a lot of different things with that, right? The good thing about the good thing about matching is that you can cover a lot of different areas. They're easy to develop, they're easy to score. Problem is that they're really hard to go beyond basic knowledge, because once you get into comprehension level or application or even analysis, and you can do it, but again, you lose excuse me, a lot of the benefit of the matching item, because the responses and the descriptions get so long and so complicated that it takes that amount of time to make, and it takes that amount of time for the students to read and complete. And this is the other part of it, that they become really susceptible to clues, especially if you don't have a large homogeneous list, meaning that it's all one topic. And just pointing out that idea, this is usually one rule that needs a little explanation, is that if I have a matching and I had two columns like this, right, I don't really need to know much about anything in order to get these things right, depending on what my learning goals were, of course. But these are so different that there's only one thing that would go with oak trees, right? The leaves. Only one thing that would go with the stars, the squares, the spiders, and so on. So you need to make sure that everything is kind of the same. And you did this for the practice exams, practice quizzes, which I'll get graded by the weekend as well. If we're talking about multiple choice, it's very flexible, a lot of good benefits, some recommendations again, tips about how you might want to make them, how you can extend them beyond just recall, right? Lots of examples. And the great thing about multiple choice is that they are adaptable. You get around, you can ask the same kinds of questions as you would with the short answer, but you get to pick what the possible answers are. You lower the guessing factor. You don't have to worry about spelling. You don't have to worry about homogeneous lists like you do in matching. It can be different because every question is different. The bad thing about multiple choice is that they're really hard to make. You are still hard-pressed to get any real measure of how the students think about things, like you would with essays or performance assessments. And sometimes it can be hard to find a good number of plausible distractors, all of the options that aren't right. Their main job is to distract the person from the right answer. And if they don't do their job, you're really losing the benefit of multiple choice, and you're kind of shifting back towards a true and false type question. So multiple choice, again, really adaptable. It also takes up more space on paper, I should say that too. But they're very flexible, and they give you some good diagnostic information. If you set up the options right, you can figure out where people are going wrong, especially in math things and stuff like that. If we go with short answer items, the biggest or best thing about this is that you can measure recall rather than recognition. And as we've talked about before, recall is much more difficult. Even if you're working at level 1, it's a lot harder to dredge things up out of your memory if you don't have any cues than just recognizing something out of a lineup. The second greatest thing about short answer is that it eliminates guessing to a much greater degree, right? Multiple choice has still got a 25% chance of getting it right. Short answer, if I don't know, I'd probably maybe 5%, right? 10% tops, depending on how many of the things I have options of. I will also say that if you put a word bank in with short answer questions, it has now become a matching set of questions. And so short answer items really only refer to those problems where the correct answer is a word or a phrase, and there is no list that people get to choose from other than what's in their head. The bad thing is still not good at complex learning outcomes. Sometimes, especially if you don't give a very concise question, it's tough to grade because people don't always give you exactly what you want, even though you're looking for one specific thing. So you have to make sure your questions are constructed in a very specific manner. You have spelling issues, You have rounding issues and, things like math or approximations, people kind of getting the gist of an idea rather than supporting with specific details. And so you have usually multiple answers that are okay. And that makes the grading time a lot longer. You don't think it would, but it does. And so, excuse me, short answers are great if you're trying to measure recall, but you always have these other issues of multiple answers, spelling issues, students taking time to write it out, right? It'll take them longer, and so on. And so when you're thinking about these 3 different or 4 different types of objective test items, true and false, alternative response, short answer, matching, and multiple choice, you always kind of have to balance the pros versus the cons. What's going to give me the best quality of information when I consider how much time I'm going to have to invest in making it, in the students taking it, and me grading it and giving feedback. Okay. So that's the general idea that I want you to focus on in here. All the rules about how to make things. You can go through this PowerPoint, maybe I will, in the lecture. You can go through all these recommendations on how to make things, right? And they kind of target Popham's rules. But I do want you to spend a good amount of time thinking about the pros and cons. When we look at the project, you will have to justify all your selections. So if you choose an essay, or you choose a short answer, or you choose multiple choice or matching, you need to justify why you think that is the best option in terms of time and quality. I will go into the next set of subjective items, essays, and performance assessments in another video, just so this thing isn't that long. So if you got any questions, bring them to class. Would love to talk more about it. But focus on those pros and cons, thinking about how you want to assess the goals that you are creating for your